the 8-hour workday. Yes. This is where Hazel Johnson and Peggy Salazar pioneered the environmental justice movement. Woo, woo. And this is also the place where recently organizing won the cancellation of the ShotSpotter contract.
That's right.
Let's go.
ShotSpotter campaign, raise your hand. Woo!
Amazing. Y'all, we're about to have 400 people here this weekend, which is incredible. My mind is completely blown by that. And a lot of you all traveled to be here. Some of you are native. Excited to be here with you all, to build with you all. Thank you again so much. And with that, we're going to get ahead and start introducing our first panel.
Let's give it up, first plenary of the weekend. All right, so we got our panelists on deck. And I want to invite everyone to show so much love, to show a lot of appreciation for our first plenary. Can I get a drum roll, please? So it's my honor to introduce our first plenary of the weekends. And tonight's plenary is Genocide Powered by Tech, What Palestine Can Teach Us About Technology. So, let's show lots of love to our moderator for our first plenary of Take Back Tech, Assia. Algerian-American investigative journalist and filmmaker. Let's show some love. We are also honored to introduce Jumana Musa, human rights attorney and racial justice activist. A huge welcome to Mohammad Khatami, organizer with No Time for Apartheid. That's right. And of course, a big round of applause for Shtaya, campaigns and partnerships manager and corporate engagement lead at Digital Action. And over to Assia. Thank you so much.
Testing, okay. Thank you all for having us and for that warm introduction. The role of tech in the ongoing genocide in Palestine is so critical of an issue that they decided to start this convening with this discussion, and we really appreciate that. From social media censorship to the Israeli government's leveraging of AI to mass surveil and mass murder people, Palestinians have long borne the brunt of the weaponization of technology, so it's really apt that we start this conversation here. And the use of this technology has resulted not only in a genocide that's killed more than 39,000 Palestinians in Gaza, but has also led to the arrest, imprisonment, and torture of thousands of Palestinians across the West Bank. And still yet, the siege of Gaza is seeing further advances of technology as a weapon of war. Meanwhile, Israel continues to export surveillance tech to borders and police departments across the world. We're joined today by three brilliant people who are going to help us analyze some of the issues. And we'll start first with Jumana, who recently joined us, came all the way from Palestine, in fact, to join us. So, Muna is a campaigns and partnerships manager for the MENA region at Digital Action. And Muna, our collective understanding of what's happening in Gaza right now has been shaped so much by social media. And at the same time, socials are being weaponized against Palestinians on the ground, dehumanizing them, inciting hate speech against them, etc. Can you tell us a little bit about how social media, we think about it a lot in the context of censorship over here, but how is it affecting directly the lives of Palestinians on the ground?
Yeah, of course. Good evening, everyone, and it's really lovely to be here and honored to be with the great panelists on this opening session. So, being in Palestine during those times is the exact, or represent the exact word of being lonely, isolated from the whole world, being in isolated areas where even Palestinians cannot visit or see their families in other cities because of the on-the-ground military checkpoints that is forcing us or denying us or just trying to connect with families is so depressing in this time. So social media is kind of the window or the chance for Palestinians can connect with each other. Also, despite all the fragmentation that has been happening for decades for Palestinians, social media platform is or should be the place where we are having the Palestinian conversations, try to think louder about the day after, about what we want and where we want to go. However, the reality is a bit different with all the censorship that we are facing, with everything that Palestinians are encountering on social media platforms. There are different points that I think should be covered whenever we are speaking about social media platforms, but I will start with the censorship on Palestinian voices and Palestinian narrative. And here I will definitely be starting with the documentation of war crimes that Palestinians are exposed to in everyday life. I know now everything we're seeing is regarding Gaza and it deserves to be covered. However, it has been happening for a very long time, and even before October 7th, where people were also censored, where all documentation of human rights violations and war crimes have been taken down, have been suspended, have been sometimes shadow banned, and in many other cases, people's accounts has been suspended permanently or temporarily, depends on what they are doing. And all of that has been permitted under the so-called violations of the community guidelines of the different social media platforms. However, as someone who has been engaging with tech platforms for quite a long time and who has been involved in the documentation and advocacy in the tech space, I would be saying that the content that has been taken down is not more than a documentation of war crimes where people are just like documenting what they are witnessing. In many cases, of course, we can't make generalization. On the other hand, we are also seeing a lot of incitement, hate speech, and violent speech that has been spread all over social media platforms against Palestine. The anti-Palestinian racism on social media platforms is now more than ever, and social media platforms know about that, and they are allowing it by choice. They are cherry-picking human rights. They are allowing or cherry-picking free speech. They are allowing incitement and hate speech to be spread around or against Palestinians, which is basically contributing to dehumanize Palestinians, to label Palestinians, and to stereotype us. There are different incidents that has been happening since the beginning of this ongoing genocide, where social media platforms biased against Palestinians showed or proved that it's not only about censorship, or it's not about here or there. It's a systematic failure to protect people on the ground, to protect voices and narratives for people. It's a systematic failure to protect people from tech harms. And maybe I can give you an example of a stereotyping event that happened earlier this year when there is an Instagram user who has the word Palestinian and then the Palestinian flag and then the word Alhamdulillah on his bio, which means praise to God, in his bio on Instagram. And when people were clicking on the automatic translation for the bio, it was giving them that Palestinian terrorist. And of course, Instagram said that's a technical glitch and they solved it. But how many technical glitches do we need to solve the deep-rooted bias against Palestinians, this discrimination that has been occurring for so long? And just also for a background, back in May 2021, when also the Israelis were attacking Gaza for 12 days, and they were forcibly displacing people in the Sheikh Jarrah and Silwan, Jerusalem neighborhoods. Also, Palestinian content has been taken down, incitement, hate speech in Hebrew language was allowed against Palestinians. And as a result of that, we were advocating to have, or we were pushing Meta to have a human rights due diligence on how they are moderating their Arabic content versus how they are moderating their Israeli Hebrew content. And the results came out after a year and a half from May 11th to prove that the Meta's policies are biased against Palestinians. They are largely moderating Palestinian Arabic content, barely moderating Israeli Hebrew content, which deprive Palestinians the right to free speech, gathering and assembly, political participation, and non-discrimination. That's, I'm still scratching the surface. I'm not speaking more in depth about the other platforms. I'm not saying anything about the real impact of the tech harm that we are witnessing on the social media platforms. The incitement and hate speech that I've mentioned led to burn some cities in Palestine. The Hawara pogrom that happened last year was a result of the incitement, hate, and violent speech from the Israeli extremist far-right settlers on the social media platforms that we have been repeatedly reporting that to social media platforms. On top of that, social media platforms are ignoring civil society calls to protect people during the times of crisis. And honestly, this is not only in Palestine. I know we're here to speak about the ongoing genocide in Palestine, but we are not alone. This is happening in every country around the world, especially in those countries in the global majority, like the global majority countries. Why? It's because of the political economy and because we're not pushing or we're not having the power to force social media platforms to invest enough or proper resources to protect people from tech harms. Technologies that emerge in global north countries are now weaponized against people in our region, in our countries, just because we don't have the political power to regulate those platforms and to force them or to show transparency about what investments they took in place to protect people during such times. And to conclude with the investments part, just to give you an idea about Palestine-Israel thing, Israel ads purchasing power from Meta's ads is equal to Palestine, Jordan, and Egypt purchasing ads power combined all together. That's when we're speaking about the political economy power and how certain countries have more influence than other countries. And lastly, you may be wondering why they are censoring Palestinian content and allowing the Israeli hate speech violence. And I would just be highlighting something about the systematic efforts that Palestinians are facing to suppress their voices, where in 2015, the Israeli government formulated something or established something called the Israeli Cyber Unit, where they are repeatedly and regularly monitoring the Palestinian content and sending that request to the different social media platforms, asking them to take down this kind of content. Before October 7th, the response rate or the approval rate for the different social media platforms, according to the Israeli Cyber Unit, was between 87% to 90% of those requests. And they are sending tens of thousands of requests annually. Since October 7th, and after a month, like between October 7th and November 7th, the response rate was even higher and it reached to be 94%. They were approving 94% of the content that they were receiving, they were taking down. And those numbers are not according to any of the social media platforms because they are not transparent about those numbers. However, those numbers are according to the Israeli Cyber Unit itself because they have the access to information though. The last part, if I mean, not more time, but the last part is, on top of all the tech companies' censorship, Palestinians are also sometimes arrested and persecuted just because they are posting online. And this is happening regularly from the Israeli authorities where they are arresting Palestinians for sharing their opinions online according to different laws, because they do have the cybercrime laws and they do have also something called the Facebook law that has been in regulation for over 3 years, but it has not been finalized yet among other laws. But they don't use it though. They can just arrest you under the excuse that you are inciting violence against them. And the word inciting to violence is just a broad, vague term that is used to arrest Palestinians and to spread the chilling effect. And they are doing that with the most influential people. At the beginning of this ongoing genocide, they arrested a singer, actress, among other people, and high-profile people, just spread the fear among others. and to create this chilling effect where people are afraid to share their opinions freely online. And unfortunately, they are sometimes succeeding with that. And in 2018, we've conducted, or I used to be working in a Palestinian organization that conducted research, and 2/3 of Palestinian young people were not willing to share their political opinions online just because of the chilling effect. I will stop here, but I would be more than happy to elaborate on any of the points. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Luna. And we'll come back to you to talk a bit more about social media and censorship as it relates here and to organizing. Next. Israel has for years used Palestine and Palestinians as a testing ground for technology and for AI products specifically, most recently. And you know, we've heard many of the names of these AI systems. They have these really mundane names that are now turned into insidious things like lavender, the gospel, which is a location targeting list. Another system that is called Where is Daddy, which tracks the movement of targeted people on kill lists, and in many cases waits for them to go home before ordering an airstrike. There's a direct relationship between the methods that Israel uses and the shapes that these technologies take and the effects. For example, in just the first month of the genocide, half of the 6,000 people killed belong to the same group of families, leading to the extermination of entire family lines in Gaza. And so there are these direct relationships between how the tech is being used and these really insidious effects on the ground. Jumana, can you talk to us about not only how these AI systems are being tested on Palestinians, but how then they're exported all over the world for use by authoritarian governments?
Thanks for that. I want to start with a panel note, which is never go after them. That's a panel note for all of you. I want to thank Media Justice for putting this panel together. It feels good to be in this space at this moment. I told someone I'd probably cry on the panel. I will probably cry on the panel. I will also say I am here in my personal capacity. Some of this does relate to the work I do, but also a life of organizing work and knowledge. And so I wanted to start with the Boundaoui quote. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Which is, I speak only for myself, but that self is full of collective memory. And that's what I'm here with today. So when we talk about, it's not just AI, but tech, and the ability to develop tech, and the ability to develop really insidious, horrific tech. Using a population that has been divested of humanity, divested of rights, divested of their voice, and kept from, as we just heard, right, putting information out into the atmosphere is, I think I'm going in and out. Am I just hearing that? Maybe. Yes, okay. I got it. But that is exactly what gives you the ground, or as Anthony Lowenstein's book calls it, the Palestine laboratory, right? The fertile ground to develop the most insidious things, and then market those worldwide and use that as a fundamental component of your economy. And that is where we're at right now with Israel. So I want to talk about a couple of different things, right? Not, like I said, not just the AI, which we will talk about, but does anybody remember the shooting in California where they were like, oh my God, you can't get into the phone, all the criminals have gone dark. Apple, you have to unlock the phone. Right? This was very much an effort by the FBI who's been pushing companies to cell phones that have backdoors that are unencrypted. And they, said, we can't do it. In reality, they had actually messed it up and locked themselves out. So they tried to push this. Apple went to court when it looked like they were going to lose. They were like, my bad, we got it. All good. And what that was they had Celebrite. Celebrite, which was a technology developed in Israel, which will break into a phone. And with its UFED reader, able to download all of the contents of that phone. I know some of you are in Signal, and people are like, I thought Signal was safe, they got Signal messages. Guess how you get Signal messages? You have an open device. Just like every time you unlock your device, you can look at your Signal and there's the messages. Right? That's the difference between having to try and capture a message in transit and hope it's unencrypted, or being able to break into a device and download everything. The reason I bring up Celebrite in particular is because it is now, it's insidious ways, everywhere. Right? And I say that as someone who works with and trains criminal defense lawyers. In almost every case, the first thing they will do is get a warrant saying, and in the cheapest ways, right? Criminals use their phones to commit crimes. Therefore, we need to unlock this phone and they list everything. Emails, photos, texts, contacts, like everything you can think of. And literally download everything from the device. That's not a great protection from a warrant, right? We're supposed to be able to say, this is where the thing happened, I need these photos. That's not what they're doing, and then they're hanging on to them, and sometimes revisiting it. And so, again, when you have a population that has been so divested of humanity, through settler colonialism, through apartheid, through a media that invests humanity in one side, which is considered Western, civilized, being white, like us, and I use that term loosely, these tools become normalized. And again, when you talk about how do you test this, I want to talk a little bit about face recognition, because it's another kind of tool that is used a lot more than we realize here in the US. It's used around the world, and it's used in really insidious ways. I'm using that word a lot. For face recognition, there's a lot of ways people try to train their face recognition. However, when you're Israel and you have occupied populations and you have a whole enlisted group of young people whose job it is to roam around and occupy people, you can do things like say, your job today, you're not off the clock until you bring me 50 photographs and we can enter into a database, right? And that's part of how they were building their face recognition. I know there's some folks in the room here who have sued Clearview, right, which is another face recognition company that was scraping the internet and gathering photos in contrast to the terms of service for various social media platforms and doing, that's how they were doing their business. They didn't have a population. They can say, you're not off work today until you brought me 50 photos, right? And they did actually try it in San Diego. This was a while back. They just had cops with, what do they call them, tablets. They would go around and photograph people from time to time that they stop. But again, this is a society where, at least in theory, right, there's laws, there's pushback. There's some kind of scrutiny. When you don't have that, you can go at it. So there was even at one point a face recognition company called Faceception, which by its own admission was not based on science. However, it claimed that it could recognize terrorists. I think you can probably guess what recognizes terrorists, right? It's essentially just a technology that people develop for the hell of it to see if people will buy it. That is racial profiling at its worst. The other types of things that we'll see, and it has gone to a lot of countries. I want to say, we talk about some of these things. Celebrate is all over the world. Pegasus, which some of you may have heard of, right, which is a more invasive way of breaking into a phone. Pegasus, when people discovered it, say discovered loosely, because again, it was marketed. There are the opposite of this gathering, right? Like when you go to weapons bazaars and places where people go and lay out all their deadly things. That's where these things are marketed. And so certainly it had been around the world, but people did not understand the extent to which it had been used, not just on compromised people, but on themselves. And I got a lot of pushback when Jewish Israeli citizens realized, wait, they're using it on us? Because, there's the line. We know those people, bad terrorists. Go ahead. Us? It's It's not the way it's supposed to go. But Pegasus would infect phones and be able to take all the information in real time. It was used in Mexico against journalists, people who were trying to cover corruption and drug cartels. It was used around the world. It was used by the Saudi government. And you would think to yourself, we're selling this to the Saudi government, Israel? Yeah, they sell it to everybody, right? And sometimes there's a walk back with like, no, we're not this here. Because this is, again, where racial capital gets us. This is a financial question. And so lots of ways to break into phones, but again, it is all dependent on a population that has been dissipated, that can be experimented on. And so now we come to the space of the questions of AI, right? Face recognition has long been used in the West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, by Israeli police. They've definitely leveled up in this current conflict. But when it comes to the questions of AI and targeting, and then automated weaponry, and this is where I get to talk about all the dystopian things. There was an article where the US was sending robot dogs to Israel, and they're like, no, but they're not armed, right? They're not going to use them as autonomous weapons. In case you don't know what I mean when I say autonomous weapons, meaning the robot dog with a machine gun decides who to shoot, right? The AI decides who to shoot. Not the person, not somebody, who thinking about autonomous weapons is trained on an algorithm. And then within weeks of that, I saw an article where the US Marines were testing robot dogs with weapons, right? And so these things are not related, but the point is it's hard to draw the full line through because it is extremely secretive. Because a lot of the Israeli companies are tied directly to the Israeli intelligence units. They are completely implicated in the Israeli military. And so the information is not easy to get, right? You can try a public records request, it's not going very far. And then it is hard to piece together because if somebody speaks, the retribution is swift and soon. And so the last piece I'll get to, am I out of time? A minute. The last piece I'll get to is this question of AI and targeting. We think how can this possibly happen? Number one, I will say Israel's the one that really dug in on the idea of targeted killings, which again, in the human rights lexicon is an extrajudicial execution. You know where somebody is and your decision is not arrest them, try them, charge them, it is, we'll take them out. The US adopted that wholesale and has done it around the world, right? It's completely flipped the script. So the idea that now you've come to a place when where's daddy is the one that gets me. So here's the question of what happens in humanitarian law. What happens under the laws of war? There are rules. You can kill people in war. The law says so. But you can't kill just anybody, right? You can't target people in their homes. You can't target people in civilian areas. We know we've seen all of this. But there is supposedly, and I say supposedly because we know we are where we are with the law now, which is not great, accountability somewhere at the end of this. And so we've now sort of stepped in this brand new world where I didn't target the civilians. I didn't direct the missile in the house. AI did that, right? So we have international law that understands the rules between two high contracting parties through the Geneva Conventions, which means two governments, two states that sign the Geneva Conventions. We have optional protocols that talk about what happens when you have non-state actors, right? Rights to resist. We have nothing. We're in a great new world when now the artificial intelligence is automating these decisions, and there's no transparency behind how they're made. So I guess I went go again. And I think over.
And we'll come back about this question of the law specifically the next round. A round of applause for Jumana. Now to Mohammad, who is a software engineer, formerly with Google, and also an organizer for No Tech for Apartheid. So, most of you are probably familiar with Project Nimbus. It is the contract that Israel entered into with Google and Amazon, a $1.2 billion contract for Google and Amazon to provide cloud computing and AI services for the Israeli military. You all have been organizing around that. Can you tell us a bit more about Project Nimbus and about
Amongst you all, when my family and friends saw the lineup, they were so excited, so big fans. Yeah, I think you definitely summarized Project Nimbus pretty accurately. Just a little bit more in depth. The aim of the project was basically to build server clusters within Israel's borders, and then occupied Palestine's borders, excuse me, and then relinquish control of management of those clusters to an apartheid entity that's committing genocide. We've been organizing against Project Nimbus for years, and we've been in the process of building worker power for years. So kind of the problem that we're facing right now is the same problem that we've been facing for years. It's only now exacerbated by the urgency of the moment, if that makes sense. So we've always been insisting that we need, as tech workers, to avoid exploitation. We need to build strength in numbers and in an organization. And since October 7th, we've obviously seen a lot of growth in that, and we've seen actions back to back. I mean, you guys probably saw, like, back in, earlier this year, we had a disruption that Eddie did at a Google Next conference, and that was one worker at the time. And fast forward 2 months later, you get 50 workers getting fired for a similar, action about labor rights, about Palestine, and about exploitation and discrimination against workers. So we noticed a very vast increase in how conscious tech workers are, but frankly, it needs to be more. It needs to be a lot more. I'm glad that in the moment we are moved to be organizing, especially given how intense Project Nimbus is. But frankly, Google as a company has recently started selling weapons, but prior to this, it was just bolstering and exacerbating consumerism, which is basically the same thing as selling weapons. Like if I sell an ad for Emirati gold, and that's bolstering Emirati power, and all of a sudden they're using that money and that funding to plunder Sudan. I've been contributing to violence this entire time, right? And now, in the moment where it's right in our faces and we can see the invoices going directly to the IDF, and we can trace our money to weapons and our services to weapons, there's a big growth in the movement, and I'm really thankful for that. But ultimately, to avoid exploitation and to stand up to the admin and leadership that is exploiting us, it's got to be more. Yeah.
So No Tech for Apartheid is a campaign, it's bigger than just Google specifically. Tell us what the demands of the campaign are.
Yeah, primarily, and probably most publicly, it's dropping Project Nimbus, divesting from Israel, ending our relationship with an entity that is committing genocide and has been committing apartheid, but also very much at the forefront, and the forefront of the campaign is pushing Google to end its discrimination against their workers that have been speaking out against ethical concerns for, like I said, years. We've been facing retaliation as long as we've been a campaign. So those are the two primary goals that we've set out, and we've made a ton of progress on that, and we're very thankful for that.
Thank you for that comment. And we'll come back to you to talk a little bit more about labor organizing towards the end. Mona, we'll go back to you to ask about social media censorship, but also the opportunities in social media, because that is also, the place where so much of the organizing and the educational campaigns have been happening. So it's, simultaneously it's double-edged sword.
Yeah, so I know I started with a very disappointing start, about censorship, people being arrested and everything on social media platforms. and our voices, our narrative, and how has that like been silenced over the years. However, over the past 8 months, or now we're starting the 9 months, unfortunately, there is something different that we can witness during this genocide. There is something different about setting the tone, changing the narrative, shifting the narrative that we are using. People were like using even the term genocide before the ICJ said it's a genocide. And I think there is a role where social media platforms are utilized. And I know despite all the censorship, despite all the restrictions that we've been speaking about, there's also this opportunity to break the isolation, to not feel so lonely during those tough times. Being there is really tiring. It's very stressful. Whenever I'm calling my friends in Gaza, they can't even access the news. They would literally be asking to translate what the news is saying because they have nothing. And I'm not sure if you're following, but like when Namibia published this statement about Germany, like I was so cheered, I was very happy. I told my friend, I was like, have you seen what happened? And she's based in Gaza. And she's like, no, I only count on you to call me and to tell me what's going on. So I was like, okay, this happened. And so the whole power of social media, the whole connection, the whole organizing that has been happening, the heartwarming pictures that are coming from the encampments in the different universities in the US, but also in the other universities around the world, is heartwarming and is breaking the isolation that people in such times are feeling. And honestly, this is creating more courage for people, because even when people are thinking about arrest or the chilling effect, or that they are afraid of losing certain jobs, because it depends where you are and what you can say and what you can use on your social media platforms. When people are seeing that also people around the world are mobilizing themselves, are shaping narratives, and are also protesting in different places, they would also be thinking about challenging this chilling effect and thinking what they can do more. That's one thing of it. But the other part of that, and despite all of the shadow banning, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the term, but shadow banning, when your content stay online on the platform, but its reachability and visibility is reduced by social media platforms. So I think many of the content that has been spread around the ongoing genocide, the documentation of the war crimes have been shadow banned, and even the organizing. And even before October 7th, whenever we were speaking about the censorship and the bias, we were speaking about censorship on Palestinian Arabic content that was very particular. And now, after October 7th, we are speaking about censorship on Palestine-related content, despite the language, because we are witnessing also censorship on Palestine-related content posted in other languages beyond Arabic. So we can see that despite all of this censorship, the power behind using social media, like the watermelon is everywhere. Now anyone is just seeing the watermelon as can recognize that you are pro-Palestine. Or I know we started using the watermelon at the beginning because when we are writing the word Palestine, it was censored. And it has a history why we're using that, because back in history we were prevented of holding the Palestinian flag, and Palestinian artists Imam Mansour and Nabil Alani have this whole exception about the watermelon. But now the social media is reviewing that idea. We started using the watermelon again to challenge the algorithms. And speaking about algorithms, I know after, here's the engineer and he can tell us more, but after repeating the same thing quite a few times, it can learn, and it might also again be censoring the new coded words. But again, people are trying to think creatively. And despite like being involved and working on the long-term changing policies for social media platforms, but those short-term threats that people are utilizing are heartwarming because it can show you that people are doing as much as they can to challenge the censorship, to resist the censorship, and to show more solidarity. And we can see people around the world are trying to decode Arabic and English and different languages just to say the word genocide. Like I've seen this word in different like symbols, different letters. They are merging languages together, which is fascinating. I know it's heartbreaking from one hand because you can't describe what's going on the ground, but from the other hand, we can see the solidarity, we can see how is that bringing us more together. And there is an African verb that I believe in, that if you want to go far, we need to go together. And this is how we as Palestinians are thinking about Palestine as a very intersectional cause with every other people around the world, with all the people of color communities and all the other groups that we usually make the Palestinian cause with. And this is very obvious, and we can see that through the digital organizing that have been done for Palestine during this ongoing years. Thank you.
That's really incredible. I think like that in this moment of despair, the only hope is in the movement and in the organizing of stuff. So thank you for sharing that. Jumana, you said when we talked earlier that movement always precedes the law. So, in this moment, there's some hope and a lot of despair also in international law. Can you talk to us about what is, how the law can be used as a tool for change in this moment?
I think what I said was the law follows, right? There's never, if you look historically, there's never been any good kind of change law that has come about because lawmakers got together and said, guys, we really should do the right thing. That's not historically how it's gone. But I want to pick up on what Mona was talking about in terms of intersectionality of this moment and struggle. And not an expert in what's happening in a lot of places, Tigray, Sudan, Congo, Haiti, so many places around the world that we keep present. But I think what I want to think about in terms of like how do we proceed in this moment? Like I was saying, you cannot develop this kind of tech without the dehumanized population who are experimenting on a regular basis. That we have convinced the world is devoid of humanity, and the United States is exactly that same, right? Like if you want to look historically at almost every horrific bad law that is passed, you can root it in the genocide of the indigenous people of these lands and the anti-Blackness that came with the abduction of people from their homes in Africa to become enslaved people here in the United States, where white people thought, this is my country, right? 100%. Whoever's got it, you all should be got it. And so this is why in many ways, the connections that have been being made for years with Palestine are coming around, right? Where you found in Ferguson when Mike Brown was shot dead in the street by the Ferguson police and left out there in the most dehumanizing. And people rose up. They were getting texts from their comrades in the West Bank saying, hey, when they throw the gas canister, this is what you do. This is how you handle it. And that's not a mistake because we know that for years, the U.S. law enforcement has been going to train with an occupying military and coming home, the U.S. neighborhoods, largely Black and brown neighborhoods, and treating those people, the folks from those neighborhoods, like they are occupying force and dealing with a dehumanized population, right? You cannot divorce these things from each other. It's the same way you look at the border, right? And the way this country talks about migrants, which they love when they got that one good story of the person who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. But we'll also take all the Israeli tech to build their virtual border fence, right? And test the technologies at the border, not just the border fence technologies, retinal scans, all kinds of things. And the reason that, the testing grounds are black, poor black and brown neighborhoods, our border areas, our water protectors, is because the ruling class sees these people as divested of their humanity, right? And treats them as such. And so when we have all of those folks coming together, right, with an informed perspective that can talk about, what the ruling class has told us is normal, to bring up Aaron Bushmill's final words, we need to approach this not about what does the law say, right, or how do we fix the law. The law is a tool. It is not an end, it is a means. And it is a tool that we use wherever we can to find out information, to slow something down, to throw a wrench in the works. But that is not what heals us, right? That is not what brings change. And that's why I love being in these rooms, because you are what brings change. And so part of that is taking this moment, taking this devastating moment to think about how do we, not just the day after, but even as we're in it, how do we take this moment to interrupt this kind of dehumanization? I will say is, I don't feel afraid of I count yet as a movement elder, but I'm on the cusp, right? One of the first demonstrations I went to, a young woman came up, she said, "Auntie, do you mind moving?" I was like, I have reached auntie status. I am auntie now in spaces, right? And that's correct. But I am watching the creative organizing that is happening, the intersectional solidarity, the analysis that doesn't approach this as, how do we get legislation to change the law? It is approaching this as, this is fully unacceptable, and we will set up our own and so the question of the law is all going to be worked out afterwards, but we need to organize ourselves through this in a way that takes into account the people who came before us, the people who are suffering right now, and the people who are going to come up in the new reality that we live.
Before we go to our last question, we probably have time for maybe one or two questions from the audience. If you have a question, you can write it on a piece of paper and pass it up to me, and hopefully we'll be able to take at least a couple. And while folks are doing that, Mohammad, can you talk to us about what advice or what guidance you might have for other tech workers, for people that are also looking to get involved, either specifically with tech or apartheid, or just to disrupt tech, or just organizing within, the values of big tech look like right now?
Yeah, I think to do that, I can respond to something that one of we were kind of touching on when you were speaking, just about surveillance and discrimination and more specifically just like concerns that you see being wielded against Palestinians. When we talk about how the technology is wielded against these populations, you have to understand that in the tech world, it's first wielded against the tech workers. That's why worker power is so crucial right now. The way they get these algorithms through, the way they get this technology through, is they count on the fact that tech workers are going to watch this happen and understand what the implications of what's being pushed is and not say anything. And frankly, they've been very successful at that for many, many years. I think it's a combination of the fact that they can placate us with benefits that frankly aren't even that great. Like, they'll still overwork us to death and they have cake in the office. So they're like, oh yeah, they won't speak up. So being wary of that is extremely, extremely important. But I think it's also really important to understand that when you enter tech, the broad majority of things you're going to be working on, like I was saying, you're either building weapons or you're aiding in consumption. It's actually hilarious. Think about a tech company, and that's literally what they're doing. If you find a tech company that isn't doing one of those two things, congratulations, that's phenomenal. I people that work for like ego startups, and I'm like, holy, like, how did you find something so morally, like beautiful to work on? So you have to like think about when you enter tech, what systems are in place to control you and exploit you, and you have to look immediately to what bases of worker power are being built and aid to that, because we need workers to stand up. That's the only way that many of these problems are going to be solved. All these problems that are wielded against these people, the Palestinians, Sudanese people, people in the Congo, it's literally just if we have the worker power, we don't want to do this, and we stand up to our high ups and say we're not going to do this. It won't happen. It's as simple as that. So that's my advice. If you're trying to get into tech, please find the basis of worker power to join. Come talk to us. We'll set you straight. We'll get you into the right spot to speak and speak out. Yeah, that's my advice.
Do we have a question that anyone like maybe you? I don't know that much too. And anyone can jump in. What is the most effective way to getting tangible accountability from tech companies engaging in this type of oppressive behavior? Who holds them accountable?
I can take one question. I can start that. It's free to jump in. So being involved in the tech accountability for quite some time, I think it's multi-layers. It's not only one. We were and still always appreciating any voices coming from within, because fighting from within is different. Witnessers inside those companies are saying, hey, this is happening. And this is the most powerful thing that we can build our work on. The other thing is, and this is what I'm now involved in my work in digital action, because we're leading a campaign against platforms, we're not organizing, we're working to protect people and their democratic rights from tech harm. So one of the ways that we are using to organize is mobilize advertisers. Social media platforms or business model is basically relying mostly on advertisers. Meta in 2022 made 98% out of the revenue from advertising. So advertisers are power holders, so we're counting on them. Legislations are powerful, but this is where you are living in a very democratic, progressive country, because we are seeing the Digital Services Act in the EU, we are seeing the GDPR among other legislations, but sometimes it could be used against other people who are living outside of those continents, such as happened at the beginning of this genocide when the letter was sent from Breton to social media platforms. Palestinians were concerned about that because it might lead to more censorship. So that's why we need a cross-continental global legislation where no one is left behind just because their geographic location, their ethnicity, or because they are living in a place where their country doesn't power against social media platforms. But unfortunately, that's not happening, and even the UN guidelines that are now in the process to be out from UNESCO are not even binding to social media platforms. That's why I think we need to organize and to take back tech by organizing more with advertisers, with investors, with workers, as well as with other actors who might be very influential in this space. And the most important job, from my perspective, is when international mainstream media is doing their job by investigating tech crimes' impact on people on different places around the world beyond the US and Europe.
So we have about 5 minutes left. The general, all of these questions are actually asking the same thing, which is, how do people fight back? And or maybe the better way to ask that is, what are some examples of movement work that you've seen happening in these past few months that have personally inspired you? And I think that also it's not just that these direct actions and this different organizing is happening, it's how it's happening that is really moving to see. We say free Palestine and recognize also that Palestine is free, that's all. In the way that this organizing is happening, in the way that people are coming together in this really unique and interesting way. So what's inspired you?
Yeah, I honestly don't have for the question because it was kind of very into the similar question. I was like, well, did I write that? How do we hold it accountable? It's like from my perspective, it really just feels like it's. I think it's just like the importance of building like the supranational like international organizations to be able to hold like companies and businesses like responsible regardless of where they are. I just feel like I think I'm so disillusioned by how like ineffective it has been so far, and I'm just like it's sort of demoralizing like what actually infrastructure exists to hold them accountable, and that's why I always like keep bringing it back. I just feel like it really is on us, both outside pressure, but also it's on the internal pressure. Like it really is on the workers because that is the bottom line. The technology doesn't exist, right? Like it literally doesn't exist. So we have to mobilize internally to stop it from getting to that point. And frankly, it's not just like easier, it's just our responsibility to do that as workers. Like it is our responsibility to make sure that our technology that we're building is being used ethically. So I keep probably a broken record. I just really want to emphasize that's how I see it all coming together. I think people don't realize how powerful it can be if we just decide that we don't want to let this happen anymore.
Disrupt. And I say that because, at some point, I'm not the technologist, I can't build anything. But we should build the tools that we need, right? We're not getting them from big tech, we're not going to get them from big tech, because that is a big money enterprise. That is not one that protects us, that's one that exploits us. So I think we need to build the tools that we want. And I say that on behalf of WhatsApp groups, Google Docs, Facebook groups. I'm dying for the alternative. This is how we organize. We can do better. I think the second piece is that it's inspiring. Is the interconnectedness and recognition of what is happening. And I think that's someone who, and I'm dating myself, but I was in high school during the first week of all that. Showing up in Palestine. So, coming to this moment and seeing people both recognize what is happening in Palestine without having to teach people, well, this is what's up colonialism, apartheid, like that piece, but also the way in which people are understanding the connectedness, right, to policing and the treatment of Black people by police, to the border and the treatment of migrants by CBP and others, to to the water protectors, to the people who are organizing. And so I think people now can draw that straight line from billions of dollars for war and genocide, no preschool lunch, and you can't have healthcare, right? Like people are starting to understand the interconnectedness of all of it and the role that sex plays. So disrupt, but also build together in community and in community and in love, and let's create that positive vision of the future that we are building towards, and not be beholden to the racial capital, the dystopian view, and the rule by dollar, classist, racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynistic, abolitionism, right, narrative that we have been fed since we were children, right? Whether it's in school, what's on TV, what's on the radio, the way news is taught, we know how to talk to each other better than that, and that's inspiring me in this moment, that we can build a future that we.
Jumana, I'll give you the last word if you have anything related to movement, organizing, specifically.
Not really sure if I have anything to say after Jumana. They were very inspiring. But yeah, we need to disrupt, but also to organize, to think collectively. And yeah, I went up once again where if we want to go far, we need to go far together. Because we're like, yeah, so that's it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Rona, Jumana, Mohammad, Assia. All right. Thank you guys so much. We couldn't have, we're so honored to be able to start Take Back Tech with such an important and timely conversation. And thank you so much for all the work that you guys are doing. We have a few more announcements, and then we can close out, people, and have some fun.
Can we take a minute to do another round of applause for our first start? Thank you.